All right, everyone, now we have something that might play a little bit of havoc, at least for the next year or so, within the world's economy, which is that Venezuela's oil production is falling off a fucking cliff. The reason for this is multiple. Number one, they've just had a thing where they were actually going to import fuel. I'm not exactly sure why. They were trying to build a refinery so that they could refine their own oil and also foreign oil, and then they could, resell it. They could power themselves because they've got a lot of crude. The problem being they don't have a lot of refined oil, and you have to buy that from the crude product after it's been refined. So they don't even have enough fucking gas. They have a lake of oil, literally, but they don't have any gas. And it's quite interesting how this works. The U.S. has a bunch of refineries, but they don't play nicely with the United States exactly. Have to get it from further away. Here's the thing, though. Part of it is that people are literally attacking and looting like oil rigs, and trying to scrap them, steal crude, I guess, probably, seal up a couple barrels, put them on a pickup, you can eat for a week at least. Another is that they can't really maintain these oil rigs, and so sometimes they're only working intermittently because they don't have. And the third is that a lot of oil workers have literally fled the country. That is, there aren't enough people left with the training necessary to actually operate their crude oil mining machinery. All of this is compounding the problem. Then you have another problem. And this is despite the fact that gas prices are quite high now. Despite the fact that oil is still cheap, gas prices have risen largely due to OPEC. They're putting the screws to Venezuela when they do things like this, by the way, because they need lots and lots of gasoline to power their economy, and they don't really have ready access. The U.S. stands to gain from this, and I'll tell you why. As the price of oil does creep upwards, whether it's coupled to the gas price or not, which at the moment it doesn't seem to be. Crude oil is still well down there, and gas prices are climbing up towards $3 a gallon in some parts of the U.S. U.S. oil drilling will become more profitable. What do we know? We've got a shit ton of oil, and a lot of it, they were planning to extract it, but then they sort of put it on hold because they're like, yeah, but the world market is being flooded by our oil, and so the oil price has collapsed. It's half of what it was 10 years ago, and it's not as profitable. So, we're just going to save it in the ground, basically, because there's no profit to be made in drilling it back out. Through hydraulic fracking and the use of natural gas as well, we've managed to discover significant additional oil reserves. Like, the concept of peak oil is obviously at this point is either fake, or they definitely overestimated how close that date was by, half a century or so. So we're not even anywhere near peak oil at the moment. But as Venezuela releases less and OPEC constrains things more, it becomes profitable again for U.S. firms to drill exploratory oil wells and to then pump it out of the ground. I mean, we know, for instance, there are enormous amounts left in Texas, in areas where, before we thought they were depleted. There are additional areas of oil in Oklahoma. We found more oil in Alaska recently. There's literally oil everywhere around us, which is it should have been common sense that, actually there's more oil in the ground. It's just you don't have the ability to find it yet because the technology's not there. Who develops it first? The United States. We're now the energy giant of the world, where we now produce a massive amount of oil compared to even 10 years ago. And U.S. firms will be more than willing to make up the difference. Venezuela, therefore, is screwed because they failed to diversify. They're having to get handouts of billions of dollars now from Europe just to keep existing as a country. Meanwhile, the amount of food available is declining. The amount of medicine is declining. Polio has come back. Maduro has just fired his vice president in order to try to save face. Basically, he's kicking the can down the road. He's operating a failed regime because he kept in place all of Chavez's policies. If he had been smart, he would have taken some of the income from the oil and diversified the economy so they wouldn't have as much of a problem right now. They would have encouraged farming, they would have encouraged manufacturing of basic goods, and things like that. Could have been that the economy wouldn't be 90% crude oil if that had taken place. Maybe it'd only be 70%. They'd still be in a massive recession, but they'd be surviving as a country. You'd probably be able to make your payments to China, which will no longer lend you money, Maduro. I think at some point he gets ousted. But because there is more oil in the U.S. than we thought before, it doesn't really matter. If Venezuela stops pumping it altogether, the other, the Middle Eastern nations and U.S. will just drill more out. It'll just make the U.S. stronger if Venezuelan oil becomes a thing of the past. The tragic irony is that Venezuela literally should look like, you know, the Netherlands or something like that as far as its development by now. There was enough time and enough income so that instead of just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, they should have been exporting this and using that total to slowly build up other aspects of the economy, laying the groundwork for 1,000 years of nonstop prosperity based on a cash export. They could have done this. It's possible. But they didn't. You know, Chavez said, well, you know, my popularity's sky high because I'm borrowing money against our oil to make more oil, number one, which is like, yeah, okay, that's great as long as the oil prices are high. Hence, it was Chavez's fault, what's happening in Venezuela largely. And I'm giving people, like, subsidies. I'm giving them subsidized healthcare, subsidized food. I'm giving them all sorts of... They get a free laptop, free cell phone. I'm paving more roads, you know, to nowhere, because that's how centralization works. I'm building them commie blocks, you know, some of which even have sewage and electricity hooked up. That's what he did for years and years. And Maduro just continued those policies. So Venezuela has still, now, even though it should be diversified, one export. Socialism does not work when it's twain with centrality. If it's a really decentralized socialism, like the bureaus are slimmed down and real efficient, it can survive a little bit better. I've told people now for some time, socialism's an enemy, because it tends to, like a tumor, it tends to grow over time. A little bit of socialism itself is not going to kill your nation. The problem is it inevitably causes too much centralization. Too much bureaucracy, things get strangulated, people make dumb decisions, corrupt individuals end up leading bureaus, it leads to scandals, inefficiency, and so forth. The bureaus tend to multiply over time, and eventually too much of your economy is just wasteful spending on government agencies that overlap anyway. That's really the danger of socialism. We're beginning to show signs of that problem here. Thank goodness Trump tends to deregulate things. Hopefully he continues to do so. We need cuts to go along with the tax reductions that he's imposed, which, by the way, are sky high in popularity, but you need to make spending cuts, too. The Republicans hate to do that. They love to cut your taxes, but they get nervous. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to change things because, you know, it's scary to them. You get someone like John McCain, he's like, the world's changed so much and all this change is negative. I don't want to cut any spending. I don't want to cut 1% of spending from a bureau because then I might get in trouble and not be reelected. It's spineless. It's what they are. As for Maduro, he's spineless too. He probably understood that eventually the gig would be up. He just, or he was told this by his advisors and chose to ignore them. In either case, he's just dumber than a box of rocks. He's dumb and corrupt. And Venezuela's falling off a cliff, commensurate with the falling off a cliff of oil prices so many years ago. What is there in the Venezuelan economy? At this point, the oil wells themselves are basically useless. People are just looting them anyway and attacking oil workers for their fucking boxed lunch of, you know, I've got half a can of green beans. Can I get by with this on a week? Yeah, I think I can. That's about all. Peace out.